Tom Garrett never figured he'd draw down on a sheriff in broad daylight. But there he stood in the middle of Millfield's main street, his Winchester leveled at Sheriff Briggs' chest, while 20 convicts in leg irons watched from the chain gang wagon. The freed man, Samuel Washington, stood behind Tom's left shoulder, no longer shackled, but refusing to run. "You made your choice, Garrett," the sheriff growled, his hand hovering over his sidearm. "Now, you live with it." Tom's finger tightened on the trigger, sweat cutting tracks through the dust on his face. 3 months of planning had led to this moment. 3 months since he'd first seen what they were doing to Samuel in that quarry. But as the townspeople gathered in doorways and windows, watching this standoff that would either free an innocent man or see them both swinging from ropes, Tom realized the hardest part wasn't breaking Samuel's chains, it was what came after. Because Samuel Washington had looked him dead in the eye that morning and said, "I ain't leaving this town, Mr. Garrett. Not till I finish what I came here to do." And Tom knew, with a sinking certainty that made his gut clench, that whatever Samuel was staying for was going to get them both killed. 3 months earlier, Tom Garrett had been minding his own business, which was mostly cattle and staying clear of town politics. His spread lay 15 miles northeast of Millfield, Alabama, far enough from civilization that he could work his land without much interference from the kind of men who wore badges and made their living off other people's misery. It was 1893 and the world was changing faster than most folks could stomach, but out on his ranch, Tom figured he could control his own small piece of it. He'd ridden into town that October morning for supplies, coffee, ammunition and a new harness for his plow horse. Nothing special about the day, just the ordinary business of keeping a ranch running. The autumn air had that crisp bite that promised winter wasn't far off, and the cottonwoods along Miller Creek were already turning gold. Tom was thinking about getting his cattle moved to the south pasture before the first hard freeze, when he heard the singing. 20 voices, maybe more, rising in harmony that seemed to make the very air shimmer. He'd heard work songs before, every man in Alabama had, but this was different. This had a power to it, a defiance wrapped in melody that made the hair on his arms stand up. The sound was coming from the quarry on the edge of town, where they worked the chain gangs. Tom had never paid much attention to the quarry. It was county business and he made it a point to keep his nose out of county business. But something about that singing pulled at him, tugged at a part of his conscience he'd been trying to keep quiet for years. Against his better judgment, he guided his horse off the main road and up the ridge that overlooked the work site. What he saw below made his blood run cold. 23 men in striped uniforms, leg irons connecting them in a long chain, working under the Alabama sun with picks and shovels. That wasn't unusual. Chain gangs were as common as cotton in Alabama. What made Tom's jaw clench was the sight of one particular convict, a tall black man who couldn't have been more than 25, taking a rifle butt to his ribs from a guard named Britt. The man, Tom would later learn his name was Samuel Washington, didn't cry out when the blow landed. He just straightened up, spit blood into the dust and kept singing. That was what got to Tom. The singing never stopped, even as Briggs raised his rifle again, even as the other guards laughed and made their crude jokes. The work song continued, steady and strong as a river current. Tom had seen plenty of violence in his 38 years. He'd fought in Cuba, had buried his share of men who'd crossed him or his property. Violence was a tool, sometimes necessary, usually regrettable, but a fact of life nonetheless. This was different. This was cruelty for the sake of cruelty, and something in Tom's chest tightened like he was about to turn away. After all, it wasn't his business, and getting involved with chain gang politics was a good way to make enemies of the wrong people. When Samuel Washington looked up, their eyes met across 100 yards of Alabama dirt and stone, and Tom saw something there that stopped him cold. Not fear, not pleading, just a recognition, man to man, that said clearer than words, "You see this, you know this is wrong." Tom touched his hat brim in acknowledgement and rode away. But the image of those eyes and the sound of that singing followed him home. For 3 days he tried to forget what he'd seen. He worked his cattle, mended fences, cleaned his rifle and told himself it was none of his concern. Samuel Washington was a convict, probably deserved whatever he got. That was the law, and the law wasn't Tom's responsibility. But on the 4th day, Tom found himself riding back to town, this time with a clear purpose. He stopped at the courthouse and asked to see the arrest record. County Clerk Morrison was a drinking buddy from the old days, and for the price of a bottle of bourbon, he was willing to look the other way while Tom flipped through the ledger. Samuel Washington, arrested September 15, 1893. Charge: vagrancy. Sentence: 6 months hard labor, vagrant. Tom stared at the entry, reading it twice to make sure he understood. In Alabama, vagrancy could mean anything from not having visible employment to being in the wrong place with the wrong skin color. It was a catch-all charge that let sheriffs fill up their chain gangs whenever they needed more free labor. Tom traced the entries above and below Samuel's name with his finger. A pattern emerged that made his stomach turn. Every other week, like clockwork, new vagrancy arrests. All black, all sentenced to hard labor, all assigned to work the quarry. Find what you are looking for? Morrison asked, settling back into his chair with a fresh glass of bourbon. Maybe, Tom said. He closed the ledger and headed for the door, but Morrison's voice stopped him. Whatever you're thinking about that quarry business, don't. Sheriff Briggs has got friends in the capital. Important friends. Men who don't take kindly to interference in their business arrangements. What kind of business arrangements? Morrison took a long sip of bourbon before answering. The kind where the county gets paid 50 cents a day for every man on that chain gang. The kind where certain people get rich while other people break rocks in the sun. Tom nodded and left without another word. But as he rode home, Morrison's warning echoing in his head, he was already forming a plan. It was probably a fool's plan, certainly a dangerous one, but he couldn't shake the image of Samuel Washington's eyes. Sometimes a man had to choose between what was safe and what was right, and Tom Garrett had never been much for playing it safe. That night, he cleaned his guns and began to figure out how to free a man from a chain gang without getting them both killed in the process. Part 2. The plan. Tom spent 2 weeks watching the quarry from different vantage points, learning the guards' routines like a hunter studying his prey. Sheriff Briggs ran the operation with military precision, which made sense, since most of his guards were veterans of one war or another, men who'd learned their trade fighting Spaniards or Indians, and now applied those skills to keeping convicts in line. The chain gang worked 6 days a week, sunrise to sunset, with only Sundays off. Every morning at dawn, a wagon rolled out from the county jail carrying 23 men in leg irons. They'd work the quarry all day under armed guard, then return to their cells when the sun went down. The routine never varied, which was both good news and bad news for Tom. Good because it made planning easier. Bad because any disruption would be noticed immediately. On his 4th day of surveillance, Tom positioned himself in the tree line north of the quarry, close enough to hear conversation but far enough away to avoid detection. That's when he learned something that changed everything about his approach. Samuel Washington wasn't just another vagrant picked up for loitering. He was educated. Tom could tell from the way he spoke during the brief moments when the guards weren't paying attention. More than that, he was organizing the other prisoners, not for escape, nothing so obvious, but teaching them things, letters, numbers, legal rights they didn't know they had. The 14th Amendment guarantees equal protection under the law. Tom heard Samuel explaining to a younger convict during their midday water break. That means they can't work us any harder than white prisoners. That means we got rights, even here. Guard named Murphy overheard and drove his rifle butt into Samuel's kidney. Only right you got is to keep your mouth shut and swing that pick. Samuel doubled over but didn't cry out. When he straightened up, there was something in his posture that told Tom everything he needed to know about the man's character. Samuel Washington wasn't just surviving this place, he was fighting it, one small act of resistance at a time. That evening, Tom rode into town and found a saloon where the guards drank after their shift. He bought a round for the house and settled in to listen. Alcohol loosened tongues, and within an hour, he'd learned more about the quarry operation than 2 weeks of surveillance had taught him. The guards were getting rich off the convict lease system, 50 cents a day per prisoner from the county, plus they could hire out the chain gang for private work at $1 per man per day. The prisoners never saw a cent, of course. They were working off their sentence, but with sentences that could be extended for infractions as minor as talking back or working too slowly. Some men had been on the gang for years. That Samuel boy's been nothing but trouble since day one, Murphy complained, already 3 whiskeys deep. Thinks he's better than the rest on account of he can read. Briggs wants to make an example of him, but the son of a bitch won't break. What kind of example? Tom asked, keeping his voice casual. Murphy leaned in close, bourbon heavy on his breath. The kind that'll shut up every other uppity Negro in the county. Accident in the quarry. Rock slide maybe. Happens all the time. Tom's hand tightened around his glass, but he kept his expression neutral. When? Soon as Briggs gives the word. Could be tomorrow. Could be next week. Depends on how much more trouble the boy causes. Tom finished his drink and headed home, his mind racing. Whatever he was going to do, it had to happen fast. An accident in the quarry would be easy to arrange and impossible to prove. Once Samuel Washington was dead, there'd be no undoing it. The plan Tom came up with was simple, which made it dangerous, but also gave it the best chance of working. Chain gangs were vulnerable during transport. 23 men shackled together couldn't move fast or fight effectively. If he could stop the wagon between the jail and the quarry, he might be able to free Samuel before the guards could organize resistance. The weak point in the route was Miller's Bridge, a narrow wooden span over the creek about 3 miles from town, and the road curved sharply on both approaches, limiting visibility. More importantly, if Tom could disable the bridge, the wagon would have to stop. In the confusion, he could cut Samuel loose and get him away. But first, he needed to let Samuel know what was coming. Tom waited until Sunday, when the prisoners were allowed visitors. He dressed like a preacher, black coat, Bible in hand, and walked into the county jail, like he belonged there. The desk sergeant barely looked up from his newspaper. Here to minister to the prisoners. Tom's cell block 3, got 15 minutes. The jail was a brick building that smelled of unwashed bodies and despair. Tom walked down the corridor until he found Samuel Washington, sitting on a narrow cot, reading a tattered copy of Frederick Douglass. The man looked up when Tom approached, and again there was that recognition, not surprise but acknowledgement, as if he'd been expecting this visit. "You're the rancher," Samuel said quietly. "Seen you watching the quarry." "Tom Garrett." He kept his voice low. "You know why I'm here. Got a fair idea. Question is, what you want in return." Tom had expected gratitude, maybe relief. Instead, he was getting negotiation. Nothing. Just trying to do what's right. Samuel studied him for a long moment. "Mr. Garrett, I appreciate what you're thinking about doing, but there's something you need to understand. I didn't come to Millfield by accident. I came here looking for someone. Too. My sister, Mercy Washington. She was working as a teacher at the colored school here. 2 months ago, she disappeared. Sheriff says she ran off, but Mercy wouldn't run, not from her students, not from her work." The pieces clicked into place in Tom's mind. "You think something happened to her. I know something happened to her. Question is what, and who did it. That's why I let them arrest me on that vagrancy charge. Figured if I was on the inside, I might learn something, and I have." Tom glanced around to make sure no other prisoners were listening. "What kind of something?" "The kind that'll get us both killed if we're not careful. But if you're serious about helping me, Garrett, I need more than just an escape. I need a partner, because what happened to my sister, it's bigger than just one missing woman, and the men responsible got badges and county connections." The 15 minutes were almost up. Tom could hear the guard's footsteps approaching. "Tuesday morning, Miller's Bridge. Be ready." "I'll be ready, but remember what I said. This doesn't end with breaking chains. This ends with finding the truth about what happened to Mercy. You prepared for that kind of fight?" Tom looked into Samuel's eyes and saw the same determination that had kept him singing through rifle butt beatings. "Reckon we'll find out." The guard appeared at the end of the corridor. "Time's up, preacher." Tom walked out of the jail knowing he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. But for the first time in months, the weight in his chest felt lighter. He wasn't just planning a jailbreak anymore. He was going to war. Part 3. The Break. Tuesday morning came gray and cold, with fog rolling off Miller Creek like smoke from a dying fire. Tom had spent Monday night cutting through 3/4 of the bridge's support beams, leaving just enough wood to hold the structure, until the wagon's weight finished the job. He'd positioned himself in the brush 30 yards downstream, Winchester loaded and sighted, waiting for the sound of splintering timber. The chain gang wagon appeared at 7:15, right on schedule. 23 men in striped uniforms, leg irons connecting them in a line, with 4 armed guards riding alongside. Tom could see Samuel in the middle of the group, his head up, scanning the tree line. When his eyes found Tom's position, there was the slightest nod. He was ready. The wagon hit the bridge at normal speed.
Tom heard the driver curse as the front wheels dropped through the suddenly collapsing roadbed, then the crash of the entire structure, giving way. The wagon pitched forward into the creek, sending guards scrambling and prisoners tumbling in a tangle of chains and bodies. Tom was moving before the dust settled. He came out of the brush at a dead run, Winchester barking orders louder than words. "Hands up, all of you." Now, 2 guards went for their guns anyway. Tom put the first one down with a shot to the shoulder that spun him around and dropped him in the creek. The second one thought better of it. When Tom's barrel swung his direction, Sheriff Briggs wasn't with the transport. He rarely rode with the chain gangs anymore, delegating that duty to his deputies. "Keys!" Tom shouted at the wagon driver, who was struggling to untangle himself from the reins. "Throw them here." The driver, a thin man named Paulson, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, tossed a ring of iron keys onto the bank. Tom caught them one-handed while keeping his rifle trained on the guards. "Samuel Washington, you come forward." Samuel worked his way through the line of prisoners, his leg irons clanking against the others. When he reached the end of the chain, Tom tossed him the keys. "Get yourself loose." It took Samuel less than 30 seconds to work the lock on his shackle. When the iron fell away, Tom expected him to run for the tree line. Instead, Samuel bent down and began unlocking the leg irons on the other prisoners. "What the hell are you doing?" Tom demanded. "What's right?" Samuel replied, moving to the next man in line. "You want to leave some of these boys chained up while we run free?" Tom glanced at the guards, who were regrouping. The wounded man was back on his feet, clutching his shoulder, but reaching for a dropped pistol. In about 2 minutes, this whole situation was going to go from rescue to massacre. "Samuel, we got to go. Now." Not without them. Samuel had freed 6 men and was working on the 7th. The other prisoners weren't running. They were helping, passing the keys down the line, working with the efficiency of men who'd learned to move fast under pressure. Tom realized he had a choice. He could grab Samuel and force him to run, probably saving both their lives, or he could trust the man's judgment and help him free 23 convicts, which would make them both the most wanted men in Alabama. The guard was almost to his pistol. Tom made his choice. He put a bullet in the dirt 6 inches from the guard's hand. I wouldn't. In the next 3 minutes, Tom Garrett went from planning a simple jailbreak to leading a full-scale prison revolt. 23 men shed their chains and disappeared into the Alabama woods like smoke in wind. Tom gave them a 10-minute head start, then fired a final warning shot over the guards' heads. "Tell Sheriff Briggs that Tom Garrett freed these men," he called out. "Tell him if he wants to discuss it, he knows where to find me." But instead of heading home to his ranch, Tom found himself following Samuel Washington deeper into the woods. Because Samuel hadn't run for freedom, he'd run towards something. And whatever it was, Tom knew it was connected to a missing woman named Mercy, and secrets that certain people would kill to protect. "Your sister," Tom said when they stopped to rest, near an abandoned mill. "Tell me about her." Samuel leaned against a tree, breathing hard from their run. "Mercy was teaching at the colored school here in Millfield. Smart as a whip, stubborn as a mule. She came here from Atlanta, said she wanted to make a difference in a small town. What happened to her? That's what I aim to find out. But I know she was asking questions before she disappeared. Questions about missing children. Questions about where certain folks got their money. Questions about why so many young black men keep getting arrested for vagrancy." Tom felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. "You think your sister uncovered some? I think my sister found out that the chain gang is just the tip of the iceberg. And I think whoever killed her is going to try real hard to kill us too, now that we've stirred up their operation." From somewhere in the distance came the sound of dogs barking. Tracking dog. Sheriff Briggs wasn't the type to let 23 prisoners escape without a fight. "We need to keep moving," Tom said. "No." Samuel pushed away from the tree, his jaw set with determination. "Running just makes us look guilty. Besides, I got business in this town that ain't finished." "What kind of business?" Samuel's eyes held the same fire Tom had seen in the quarry, the same defiance that had kept him singing through rifle butt beatings, the kind that's going to put some folks in chains for a change. "But first, I need to show you something I found before they arrested me, something that's going to make you understand why I can't leave Millfield until I've seen justice done." The dogs were getting closer. Tom could hear shouting in the distance, a posse, forming up to track them down. But something in Samuel's voice told him that whatever the man had discovered was worth the risk of staying. Lead the way, Tom said, but we better make it quick. Part 4. The Truth. Samuel led Tom through the woods to an old slave cabin that had been abandoned since Reconstruction. The roof had caved in on one side, and vines covered most of the walls, but the structure was solid enough to provide shelter. More importantly, it was hidden from the road by a thick stand of pine trees. Mercy found this place, Samuel explained as they ducked through the door. She was using it to teach reading to children, whose parents didn't want them going to the official school. Too dangerous, they said, might draw the wrong kind of attention. The interior was sparse but carefully organized. Wooden crates served as desks, and chairs. A slate board leaned against one wall, covered with arithmetic problems, in a woman's careful handwriting. Books were stacked neatly in the corners, readers, arithmetic texts, even a few volumes of poetry. But what caught Tom's attention was the collection of papers hidden beneath a loose floorboard that Samuel pulled up: letters, documents, and what looked like a hand-drawn map of the county. Mercy was methodical, Samuel said, spreading the papers out on a makeshift table. When children started disappearing from her classes, she didn't just worry, she investigated. Tom studied the documents in the fading afternoon light. Names, dates, locations, a pattern of young people, some as young as 12, who'd simply vanished over the past year. Not just from Millfield, but from towns throughout the county. Disappeared how? Different ways. Some just didn't come home from work one day, others left to visit relatives, and never arrived. A few got arrested for minor offenses, and then, Samuel pointed to several entries on the list. Chain gang records show they completed their sentences, but nobody ever saw them again. Tom felt his blood cooling. How many? 17 that Mercy documented. Could be more. The map showed the county with red X marks scattered across it. Tom recognized some of the locations: remote farms, abandoned mining claims, places where a man could do business without unwanted visitors. Your sister thought these places were connected. She was sure of it. Look at this. Samuel pulled out a letter written in the same careful handwriting as the slate board lessons. She was corresponding with a teacher in Montgomery, comparing notes. Same pattern there. Young black folks disappearing, always after minor run-ins with the law. Tom read the letter, his jaw tightening with each paragraph. What Mercy Washington had uncovered was bigger than a corrupt chain gang. It was a network, stretching across multiple counties, using the legal system to supply forced labor to private interest. Young people arrested on trumped-up charges, sentenced to work gangs, then sold to plantation owners and mining companies who needed workers they didn't have to pay. Modern slavery, Tom said. Exactly. And Mercy found out who was running it locally. Samuel handed him another document, this one a copy of a contract between the county and something called the Alabama Industrial Development Company. The contract authorized the company to lease convict labor for agricultural and mining work at $2 per man per day. The county kept 50 cents. The company kept the rest, along with whatever profit they could squeeze from the workers. At the bottom of the contract, 2 signatures, County Commissioner Harold Vance and Sheriff William Briggs. Mercy was planning to take this to the federal authorities, Samuel explained. She'd made contact with a prosecutor in Birmingham, who was investigating convict leasing. She was supposed to meet him the day she disappeared. The sound of dogs was getting closer. Tom could hear voices now, calling commands back and forth through the woods. The posse was organized and moving fast. They'd probably reach the cabin within an hour. We need to get moving, Tom said. You can take this evidence to the federal prosecutor yourself. That prosecutor is dead, Samuel said quietly. Shot 3 days after Mercy disappeared. Robbery, they said, but nothing was taken. Tom stared at him. How do you know? Because I've been corresponding with his partner, man named Davidson. He's still investigating, but he's being careful. Says he needs local witnesses, people who can testify about what they've seen, like us. But there's one more thing Mercy found. The most important thing. Samuel pulled out a final document from the stack. She found out where they take the people who don't work out on the chain gangs, the ones who cause too much trouble, or get too sick to work, or try to escape. Tom looked at the paper and felt his blood turn to ice water. It was a bill of sale from the Alabama Industrial Development Company to a sugar plantation in Louisiana. The merchandise was listed simply as 27 Negro laborers, various ages, good health.
They're selling people, Tom said. selling them down south where nobody knows their names or cares where they came from. Once they're on that plantation, they might as well be dead. No records, no family to ask questions, no way to prove they ever existed. The barking was close now. Tom could see torchlight flickering through the trees. Sheriff Briggs and his men were maybe 10 minutes away. "Samuel, I need to know something. Are you planning to run or are you planning to fight?" Samuel gathered up the papers and tucked them inside his shirt. "I'm planning to finish what my sister started. She died trying to expose this thing. I'm going to see it through to the end. But I can't do it alone. What do you need?" "I need those federal prosecutors to get evidence they can use in court. I need witnesses who can testify about the chain gang operation. And I need to find out what really happened to Mercy." Samuel stood and shouldered a worn canvas bag that had been hidden under the floorboards. "Most of all, I need someone the law will listen to. Someone white, someone respectable, someone with nothing to gain from lying." Tom understood. Samuel could have all the evidence in the world, but in 1893 Alabama, the word of a black man, especially an escaped convict, wouldn't carry much weight in federal court. Tom's testimony, backed by his reputation as a landowner and veteran, might actually make a difference. "What about the posse?" Samuel smiled grimly. "Let them come. I got one more stop to make in this county before we head to Birmingham, and for that, I need Sheriff Briggs to follow us exactly where I want him to go." The sound of approaching horses was unmistakable now. Tom checked his rifle and followed Samuel out the back of the cabin, deeper into the wood. But instead of running away from town, they were circling back toward it. Because Samuel Washington wasn't done with Millfield. He was just getting started. Part 5, The Reckoning. The posse tracked them through the night, following a trail that Samuel laid down as deliberately as breadcrumbs in a fairy tale. Every broken branch, every footprint in soft earth, every scrap of cloth caught on thorns, all of it designed to lead Sheriff Briggs and his men to exactly the place Samuel wanted them to be. That place was the Vance plantation, 3 miles south of town. Tom realized Samuel's plan when they crested the ridge overlooking the plantation house at dawn. Below them, spread across 100 acres of bottom land, was the Alabama Industrial Development Company's main operation. Not just a few hidden workers, but dozens of men, women and children working the fields in the gray pre-dawn light, all of them black, all of them moving with the careful, beaten-down shuffle of people who'd learned that drawing attention meant pain. "Jesus," Tom whispered. "Mercy found this place 2 days before she disappeared," Samuel said. "Took her 3 weeks of following chain gang wagons and asking the right questions, but she tracked down where the disappeared prisoners ended up." Tom studied the scene below through his field glass. Guards with rifles walking the perimeter, overseers on horseback monitoring the workers, and at the center of it all, a big white house where County Commissioner Harold Vance lived like a king off the profits of human misery. How many people down there? Mercy counted 47. Could be more now. Some as young as 14, some old enough to be grandparents. All of them supposed to be dead or gone according to official records. The sound of pursuit was getting closer. Tom could hear Sheriff Briggs calling orders to his men, organizing them for a final push. The posse would reach their position within minutes. "What's your play?" Tom asked. Samuel pulled a bundle of papers from his bag, copies of everything they'd found in the cabin, plus new documents he'd somehow acquired during his time on the chain gang. "We make Briggs choose. He can arrest us and hope nobody asks too many questions about why we were snooping around his operation, or he can try to kill us and risk a federal investigation when we turn up missing." "What makes you think there'll be a federal investigation?" "Because I sent copies of everything to that prosecutor in Birmingham before I let myself get arrested, with instructions to start asking questions if something happened to me." Tom stared at him. "You've been planning this for months, since the day Mercy disappeared. Only thing I didn't count on was finding a partner." Samuel shouldered his bag and started down the ridge toward the plantation. "Question now is whether that prosecutor gets live witnesses or dead martyrs." They made it halfway down the slope before Sheriff Briggs and 6 deputies appeared on the ridge behind them. "Garrett, Washington, hold it right there. Tom and Samuel froze, hands visible, rifles lowered but ready. Below them, the plantation was waking up. Guards shouting orders, workers being herded into groups, overseers mounting horses and riding hard toward the big house. Looks like Commissioner Vance is getting nervous, Tom observed. Briggs and his men picked their way down the slope, weapons drawn but not quite aimed. The sheriff was playing it careful. He needed to know what Tom and Samuel had learned before deciding whether to arrest them or kill them. Tom Garrett, Briggs called out when he was close enough for conversation. You got any idea how much trouble you've caused yourself? Got a fair idea. Question is, how much trouble have I caused you? Briggs's face went hard. Breaking a chain gang is a federal offense. Could get you 10 years in federal prison, but maybe we can work something out, you being a respected landowner and all. What kind of something? You walk away. Right now. Forget whatever you think you've seen. Forget about your colored friend here. And go back to your... I'll tell folks you were confused, thought you were helping capture an escaped prisoner instead of freeing one. Tom considered the offer. It was reasonable, even generous by Alabama standards. All he had to do was abandon Samuel and pretend he'd never seen the evidence of the slave labor operation. He could go home, tend his cattle, and live out his days in peace. But then he looked at Samuel standing straight and proud despite being surrounded by armed men, and he thought about Mercy Washington, a teacher who'd died trying to protect children, and he thought about the 47 people working the fields below, people whose existence had been erased from official records. Tell you what, Sheriff, Tom said, how about you explain to me what happened to Samuel's sister, the teacher, Mercy Washington? The change in Briggs's expression was answer enough. Guilt and rage flickered across his face before he could control them. Don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. She was asking questions about missing children, getting too close to your operation here. So you had her killed. You got no proof of that. Samuel spoke for the first time since the standoff began. Actually, I did. He pulled a final document from his bag, not a copy, but an original letter in feminine handwriting. Found this hidden in the jail in a cell that used to hold female prisoners. My sister wrote it the night before she died. Tom watched Briggs's face go pale as Samuel read aloud. If something happens to me, look for Harold Vance. He's the one buying children from the chain gangs. Sheriff Briggs arranges the arrests. Vance handles the sales. I have proof hidden at the school. Tell Samuel I'm sorry I couldn't wait for him to find me. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of horses approaching fast, but they weren't coming from behind them. They were coming from the direction of town. Federal marshals, Tom realized, led by a man in a dark suit, who looked like he'd been riding hard for days. Davidson, Samuel said with satisfaction. Right on time. Sheriff Briggs made one last desperate play, swinging his rifle toward Samuel. Tom was fast. His shot took Briggs in the chest, spinning him around and dropping him in the red Alabama dirt. As the federal marshals swarmed the plantation and began rounding up guards and overseers, Tom finally understood Samuel's plan. The man had never intended to escape. He'd intended to expose the entire operation, using his own arrest as cover to gather evidence from the inside. You played a dangerous game, Tom told him as they watched Harold Vance being led away in shackles. My sister taught me that some things are worth the risk, Samuel replied. She died believing that justice was possible, even here. Seemed like a shame to prove her wrong. In the end, the federal investigation uncovered a network that stretched across 5 counties and had trafficked more than 200 people over 3 years. The convict leasing system in Alabama was reformed, though not abolished. Samuel Washington testified before a federal grand jury and saw 17 men convicted of slavery and murder charges. And Tom Garrett, he kept his ranch and gained a friend. Samuel settled in Millfield, took over his sister's teaching position, and married a woman named Grace, who'd been one of the disappeared workers they'd freed from the Vance plantation. Sometimes late at night when they shared a bottle of whiskey on Tom's porch, Samuel would ask why a white rancher had risked everything to help a black stranger. Tom's answer never changed. Man sees something wrong. He's got 2 choices, look away or do something about it. I got tired of looking away. The truth was simpler and more complicated than that. Tom Garrett had learned that some things, justice, human dignity, the promise that all men are created equal, were worth fighting for, even when the fight seemed impossible to win. But there was something else, something he never told Samuel during those quiet evenings on the porch. The moment he'd looked into Samuel's eyes at the quarry, Tom had seen something he recognized,
the same stubborn refusal to accept injustice that had gotten him in trouble his whole life. Maybe that's why he'd risked everything for a stranger. Because Samuel Washington wasn't really a stranger at all. He was the kind of man Tom had always tried to be, trapped in circumstances that would have broken a lesser person. 5 years later, when Samuel's school had grown from a hidden cabin to a proper building with 40 students, and when Grace Washington had given birth to a daughter they named Mercy, Tom would stand as godfather at the baptism. The preacher, a white man who'd once refused to marry interracial couples, would speak about redemption and the mysterious ways that God brings people together for his purposes. Tom never put much stock in divine providence. But on that Sunday morning, watching Samuel hold his daughter while the congregation sang the same work songs that had once echoed through the quarry, he had to admit that some stories had endings worth fighting for, even when you couldn't see them coming, even when the fight seemed impossible to win. The Alabama sun streamed through the church windows, warm on his face, and Tom Garrett smiled. Sometimes a man just had to choose between what was safe and what was right. And sometimes, if he was lucky, choosing right led him to exactly where he was supposed to be all along.